In the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, beyond the reach of Roman roads and imperial armies, there are mountains where monks have whispered prayers for over 1,000 years. In those mountains, carved into rock and bathed in golden light, lie hidden scrolls, scrolls that speak of an ending few in the West have ever heard. They tell of an apocalypse not marked by dragons or beasts, not by fire raining from the sky in divine rage, but by something even more unsettling. Angels weeping, not because they've been sent to destroy humanity, but because they grieve for what we've become. This is the version of the end preserved in Ethiopia's sacred books, and it is nothing like the revelation you've been taught. Western Christianity gave us a God who returns with a sword, whose eyes burn like fire, and who divides the world into saved and damned. But Ethiopia preserved something different, a vision where Christ is not a warrior on a white horse, but a radiant shepherd walking beside the broken, leading souls not to hell, but through healing. So why did the West erase this? Why is Ethiopia's apocalypse absent from your Bible? And more importantly, what does that say about everything else we've lost? If you've ever felt like the God of Revelation sounded more like a Roman general than the Messiah of mercy, then this story is for you. Because in the chapters that follow, we'll reveal how Ethiopia's lost apocalypse might just be the last surviving voice of early Christianity, untainted by empire, untouched by conquest. A voice that still dares to say, the end is not fury, but return. High above the valleys of East Africa, where the wind whistles through ancient stone churches carved directly into cliffs, there is a silence so deep it almost feels like it remembers. In that silence, a question lingers. What if the version of the end of the world you grew up with was never the only one? Centuries before the Bible we know today was bound and standardized by Roman hands, Ethiopia was already reading a different ending. In its hidden monasteries at Lalibela and Aksum, priests still guard manuscripts older than any cathedral in Europe. These manuscripts are not apocryphal rumors. They are bound in leather, written in Ge'ez, the sacred language of Ethiopian Christianity, and they speak of a vision of the end that the West quietly abandoned. Back then, the Christian world was not a single voice. It was a chorus of communities, Egyptian, Syrian, Judean, Ethiopian, each with its own gospels, its own letters, and its own apocalypses. The Book of Revelation, which most Christians now treat as the only blueprint of the end, was once so controversial that some early churches refused to copy it at all. Meanwhile, another book called the Apocalypse of Peter was celebrated in the East. Clement of Alexandria even quoted from it, calling it a true prophecy. In Ethiopia, this book was not just read, it was canonized. Imagine that. While Rome was debating which texts to exclude, Ethiopia was preserving the ones it found most faithful. The Apocalypse of Peter described not beasts and empires, but moral choices and cosmic consequences. It drew from Jewish apocalyptic writings and early Christian mysticism to paint a picture of judgment more like a hospital than a battlefield. In Ethiopia, this text was never hidden in the back of a scholar's archive. It was read aloud, illuminated in art, sung in chants. As one Ethiopian monk explained to a Western visitor in the 19th century, we kept the books others feared. We feared losing the truth. In a way, Ethiopia became a living time capsule of Christianity before Rome. But why did this version survive here and nowhere else? Why did Ethiopia hold fast to texts that the West would later call heresy? And what happens to our understanding of Christianity if the earliest believers imagined an apocalypse nothing like the one in Revelation? To answer these questions, we must journey back to the origins of Christianity itself, to the dusty roads of Judea in the 1st century AD, where a small band of followers gathered around a teacher named Jesus of Nazareth. His message was radical: love your enemies, forgive endlessly, turn the other cheek. But after his crucifixion and reported resurrection, his followers scattered, carrying fragments of his teachings across the known world. In those early days, there was no single Bible, no unified doctrine. Christianity was a mosaic of oral traditions, letters, and visions. Apocalyptic literature was particularly popular, drawing from Jewish roots like the Book of Daniel or Enoch, which spoke of end times, divine interventions, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. These writings weren't just prophecies. They were comfort for the oppressed, coded messages of hope amid persecution. The Apocalypse of John, what we call Revelation, was written around 95 AD on the island of Patmos, likely by a disciple exiled under Roman Emperor Domitian. It was a fiery rebuke of imperial power, with beasts symbolizing Rome and a triumphant Christ returning as a conqueror. But parallel to this, other apocalypses emerged. The Apocalypse of Peter, dated to around 135 AD, was attributed to the Apostle Peter himself. It circulated widely in the Eastern churches, offering vivid tours of heaven and hell, but with a twist: emphasis on repentance, moral accountability, and divine compassion. Unlike Revelation's geopolitical focus, Peter's Apocalypse delved into personal sins, adultery, murder, usury, and their consequences, yet always with an undercurrent of potential redemption. Ethiopia enters this story early. Legend holds that Christianity reached Ethiopia in the 1st century through the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in Acts 8 of the New Testament, baptized by Philip the Evangelist. By the 4th century, under King Ezana of Aksum, Ethiopia became one of the first nations to officially adopt Christianity as a state religion, predating even the Roman Empire's conversion under Constantine in 312 AD. Isolated by geography, surrounded by deserts, mountains, and the Red Sea, Ethiopia developed its faith independently, blending Semitic, African, and early Christian elements. The Aksumite kingdom was a trading powerhouse connecting Africa, Arabia, and India. Its ports bustled with spices, ivory, and gold, fostering cultural exchanges that enriched its religious texts. Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language, became the liturgical tongue, preserving scriptures in a form closer to original Aramaic and Greek than many Western translations. Monasteries like Debre Damo, perched on sheer cliffs accessible only by rope, became fortresses of knowledge, where monks copied manuscripts by hand, illuminating them with vibrant inks derived from local minerals. While the West grappled with councils like Nicaea in 325 AD, which defined core doctrines amid Arian controversies, Ethiopia quietly incorporated texts like the Apocalypse of Peter into its broader canon. This canon includes 81 books, far more than the Protestant 66 or Catholic 73, encompassing works like Enoch, Jubilees, and Ascension of Isaiah, texts deemed apocryphal elsewhere but integral to Ethiopian theology. Picture this: a sky of molten copper stretching over the Ethiopian highlands, thunder rolling like a drum, and below a crowd of souls waiting for judgment. But instead of an iron throne or a roaring lion of wrath, they see something no Western painting of the Last Judgment ever dared to imagine: angels crying, not tears of victory, not tears of scorn, but tears of grief. This is the heart of Ethiopia's apocalypse. In its pages, punishment is not a spectacle for heaven's delight, but a wound that even the angels feel. One passage from the Apocalypse of Peter describes sinners weeping under a rain of fire while the angels stand beside them, lamenting. And I saw the murderers and those who conspired with them cast into a certain strait place, full of evil snakes and smitten by those beasts, and thus turning to and fro in that punishment. And worms, as it were clouds of darkness, encircled them. And the souls of the murdered stood and looked upon the punishment of those murderers and said, "O God, thy judgment is just." This is almost unthinkable to Western ears, raised on John's Revelation, where the imagery is beasts, plagues, and cosmic warfare. Revelation 16 speaks of bowls of wrath poured out, causing sores, darkness, and hailstones weighing a talent each. But in Ethiopia's vision, judgment is less like a battlefield and more like a hospital emergency room, a place of pain, but also of healing. The difference runs deep. In the West, hell is often imagined as a sealed chamber of eternal torment, fire with no exit. Influenced by Greek philosophies like Plato's myths of the afterlife and later by Dante Alighieri's 14th century Inferno, which depicted 9 circles of suffering, Western Christianity emphasized retributive justice. Dante's work, inspired by Virgil and Aquinas, portrayed sinners frozen in ice or boiled in blood, with no hope of escape. In Ethiopia's texts, fire still burns, but it burns to purify, to correct, to bring the soul back toward God. It's not leniency, it's divine surgery. The Apocalypse of Peter describes the condemned as washed in flame, not annihilated by it. And some there were hung up by their tongues. These were they who blasphemed the way of righteousness, and under them was laid fire flaming and tormenting them. Yet the narrative implies a process, not perpetuity. Even Clement of Alexandria, one of the earliest church fathers, writing in the late 2nd century, hinted at this hope, stating in his Stromata that punishment might be disciplinary rather than final. For all things are ordered both universally and in particular by the Lord of the universe, with a view to the salvation of the whole. Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century went further, proposing apokatastasis, the eventual restoration of all things, including sinners, through purifying fire. Though condemned as heresy at the 5th Ecumenical Council in 553 AD, these ideas lingered in Eastern traditions, including Ethiopia's. This doesn't make Ethiopia's apocalypse soft or sentimental. It's still terrifying. The moral failures named in these texts, greed, betrayal, injustice, carry real consequences. Adulterers are depicted hanging by their hair over boiling mud. False witnesses have their lips burned. But woven through the terror is an unmistakable thread of compassion. Heaven does not rejoice over a broken creation. It mourns. One Ethiopian priest once told a European scholar in the 1930s, during the Italian invasion, "Judgment is not vengeance, it is sorrow. The angels weep because every soul was meant for God." In a few words, he captured a theology the West largely forgot, a theology where God's justice and God's grief are not opposites, but twins. Imagine what that means. A God who does not stand above suffering, but bends down into it. A God whose eyes fill with tears as he purifies his own creation. What would our churches, our politics, our hearts look like if we believed that? Consider the Crusades, launched in 1095 by Pope Urban II, invoking apocalyptic imagery from Revelation to justify holy war against Muslims. Knights saw themselves as warriors of Christ, the sword-wielding king. In contrast, Ethiopian kings like Zara Yacob in the 15th century emphasized internal reform, using apocalyptic texts to call for moral purity rather than conquest. And yet, this is only the beginning, because Ethiopia's apocalypse does not stop at how souls are judged. It reimagines who leads them through the judgment and how. Imagine standing before the gates of judgment and seeing Christ return. Now ask yourself this: does he come charging on a white horse, eyes burning like fire, with a sword slicing from his mouth? Or does he walk toward you slowly, barefoot, with outstretched arms, his robes glowing with light and sorrow in his gaze? Both images exist in Christian tradition, but only one survived in the West. In the book of Revelation, the Messiah is unmistakably a warrior armed for war, soaked in vengeance. Revelation 19:11 paints the picture clearly. "And I saw heaven opened, and behold a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. This vision, born in the shadow of Roman persecution, sees the return of Christ as a reversal of imperial violence. He comes as the avenger of the oppressed. It's a cry for justice through judgment, resonating with the martyrs under Nero or Domitian, who burned Christians as torches or fed them to lions in the Colosseum. But in Ethiopia's apocalypse, preserved in the Apocalypse of Peter and echoed in Gaia's hymns, sung by monks for centuries, Christ appears differently, not as a war general, but as a radiant shepherd. He walks through the valley of judgment, not above it. He does not strike, he guides. He does not burn, he illuminates. This shepherd Messiah leads souls across bridges of light, calls them by name, and even pauses to comfort those who are afraid. In Ethiopian iconography, found in murals at churches like Bet Mariam, in Lalibela, he is often depicted not riding, but standing, arms open, palms forward, his robes glowing with ethereal light, sorrow etched in his divine gaze. These artworks, dating back to the 12th century under King Lalibela, who commissioned 11 rock-hewn churches as a New Jerusalem, blend Byzantine influences with local African motifs using ochre and indigo pigments. It's a dramatic theological contrast. One Christ comes to conquer evil with force, the other comes to heal it with presence. Neither image is less divine, but they reveal something deeper about how different cultures understood the role of Christ at the end of time. Revelation's militarized Messiah suited a church emerging from persecution into power. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, figures like Tertullian in the 2nd century defended it against pagan accusations, but by the 4th century, with Constantine's victory at the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, where he claimed a vision of the cross with "in this sign conquer," the faith intertwined with military might. Theodosius the Fine made it the state religion in 380 AD, and apocalyptic imagery justified the suppression of pagans and heretics. Ethiopia, however, shaped by its prophetic isolation and mystical roots, didn't need a militarized Messiah. Never fully colonized until Mussolini's brief occupation in 1936-1941, it maintained independence, fostering a Christianity influenced by Coptic Egypt but distinct. Its kings, claiming descent from Solomon, saw themselves as guardians of faith, not conquerors. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic compiled in the 14th century, narrates how the Ark of the Covenant came to Aksum via Menelik I, son of Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba, emphasizing covenant over conquest. They imagined a Christ shaped more by Psalm 23 than by apocalyptic battle. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." One early Ethiopian commentary, preserved in the Andemta tradition of oral exegesis, even describes the final judgment as a procession, not of soldiers, but of souls following the shepherd's light. Heaven in this vision is not won by war but revealed by love. So which Christ do we follow today, the one who wages holy war or the one who walks among the wounded? And what if this gentle shepherd, erased from the Western canon, is the same figure who will one day lead us through the fire, not with wrath but with light? What if the fire of judgment wasn't meant to punish you forever, but to save you? Close your eyes and forget for just a moment the hell you were taught to fear as a child. Not the red devils, the endless screams, the fire that never dies. Instead, imagine a fire that doesn't consume but cleanses. A fire that burns away everything false and leaves behind the soul shining. In the Western Christian tradition, hell has long been shaped by terror, from Augustine's City of God in the 5th century, arguing for eternal punishment as just retribution, to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, systematizing it in his Summa Theologica, where hell is a state of definitive exclusion from God. This culminated in Reformation debates, with Calvin's predestination implying some are eternally damned from birth, influencing Puritan sermons like Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God in 1741, painting God holding sinners over flames like spiders. From Dante's Inferno to street corner sermons, we've been taught that the end for sinners is final, eternal, and hopeless, an everlasting prison of pain. But Ethiopia's apocalypse tells a different story. In sacred Ethiopian texts like the Apocalypse of Peter and fragments from older Jewish apocalyptic writings, such as 1 Enoch, canonized in Ethiopia but apocryphal elsewhere, fire does appear. It falls from the heavens, it surrounds the guilty, it scorches the earth. But it is not portrayed as hellfire in the Roman sense. It's something far older and far more mysterious. In these visions, fire is not God's rage, but God's refinement. One passage from 1 Enoch speaks of the wicked being bound and cast into a fiery abyss, yet with implications of testing. And the spirits of the souls that belong to the wicked shall be separated, and they shall be punished in the prison house of the abyss of fire. Another from the Apocalypse of Peter describes the souls of the proud passing through rivers of fire, while angels sing prayers over them. And I saw also another place over against that one, very squalid. And it was a place of punishment, and those who were punished there and the angels who punished them had their raiment dark according to the air of the place. It's not a court handing down sentences, it's a cosmic surgery. Painful, yes, but purposeful. Even some early church fathers wrestled with this idea. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Gregory of Nyssa all hinted that punishment might be restorative, that even the damned were not beyond God's reach, that justice was not abandonment, but correction. Gregory wrote in his On the Soul and the Resurrection that the process of healing shall be proportioned to the measure of evil in each of us, suggesting a purgatorial fire for all. The Ethiopian tradition never fully embraced the Roman idea of eternal torment. Instead, it preserved something closer to the Jewish understanding of Gehenna, a valley outside Jerusalem used metaphorically in the prophets as a place of purification, not permanent separation, where refuse was burned but could be redeemed. In this vision, even fire is a form of mercy. This doesn't mean there's no judgment. Ethiopia's apocalypse doesn't flinch from naming real evil, greed, pride, injustice, betrayal, but it holds those sins up to the fire, not to destroy the sinner, but to free them. What does that say about God? A God who does not delight in the damnation of the wicked, but weeps for them, works on them, waits for them. A God who burns not to torture, but to redeem. And what does it say about us if we've spent centuries defending a version of justice that Christ himself may never have taught? Consider the implications for social issues. Western Christianity's emphasis on eternal hell fueled witch hunts in the 16th, 17th centuries, where thousands were burned, or the transatlantic slave trade, justified by some as divine punishment. In Ethiopia, where slavery existed but was tempered by Christian ethics, apocalyptic teachings stressed redemption, influencing laws under emperors like Haile Selassie in the 20th century, who abolished it in 1942. Imagine a scroll being slowly unrolled in a candle-lit room. On one side of the world, the scroll speaks of mercy, restoration, and weeping angels. But in Rome, another scroll is being sealed, this one forged by emperors and church councils, where theology would soon become law and fear would become power. The story of how Revelation became central to Western Christianity is not just spiritual, it's deeply political. When Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, something profound shifted. A persecuted faith suddenly became a state religion, and with that transformation came a new need, not just for belief, but for control. Doctrine had to be unified, dissent had to be silenced, and the Bible had to speak with one voice, Rome's voice. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD addressed Christological heresies, but canon formation intensified later. Athanasius of Alexandria's Easter letter in 367 AD listed the 27 New Testament books we know today, excluding many apocalypses. The Council of Carthage in 397 AD helped finalize the Western canon, excluding books like the Apocalypse of Peter, the Book of Enoch, and many others that still echoed in Africa and the East. And Revelation, the violent, imperial, beast-ridden vision of the end, was not only accepted, it was weaponized, because it fit. Its symbolism, beasts, war, judgment, matched the language of empire. Its imagery could be turned on enemies, the beast as pagan Rome, the harlot as heretics, the sword-wielding Christ as justification for holy war. The Western Church needed an end time that looked like a battlefield, and it got one. This influenced everything from the Byzantine iconoclastic controversy in the 8th century, where apocalyptic art was debated, to the millennial fears of the year 1000 AD, sparking pilgrimages and reforms. But Ethiopia, never conquered by Rome, never colonized by its theology, held to something older, something quieter. They developed their theology in the shadows of mountains, not cathedrals, in the voices of monks, not emperors. Their apocalypse didn't name Rome because it wasn't about Rome. It named the human heart. It judged pride, not provinces, greed, not gods. And it imagined Christ not as a conqueror, but as a guide through suffering. Their visions weren't political weapons, they were mirrors for the soul. One Ethiopian elder once said, "The end is not a war to win, it is a light to follow." And many will miss it, not because they are weak, but because they were told to fight instead of listen. That single sentence exposes everything Rome's theology forgot. The Ethiopian canon includes the Kebra Nagast, the national epic that tells how the Ark of the Covenant came to Ethiopia through Menelik, the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This gave Ethiopian Christianity something Rome never had, a sense of sacred inheritance not tied to conquest but to covenant. Where Rome turned apocalypse into empire, Ethiopia turned it into memory. So how did Ethiopia preserve these ancient truths for so long? Through a network of monasteries that doubled as scriptoria and fortresses. Debri Libanos, founded in the 13th century, housed thousands of manuscripts. During the Muslim invasions of Ahmad Gragan in the 16th century, monks hid texts in caves, preserving them against destruction. Portuguese Jesuits in the 17th century tried to impose Roman Catholicism under Emperor Susenyos, leading to civil war. But Ethiopia reverted to its traditions after his abdication in 1632. And why are modern scholars just now beginning to take them seriously? The 19th century explorer James Bruce brought Enoch manuscripts to Europe, sparking interest. In the 20th century, after Haile Selassie's exile and return, Western academics like Edward Ullendorf studied Ge'ez texts. Today, with digitization projects by institutions like the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, these texts are accessible, challenging Eurocentric biblical scholarship. What if we told the story differently? What if, instead of terrifying monsters and blood-soaked prophecies, your first picture of the end of the world was a bridge of light stretching across a dark valley, with souls walking hand in hand, led not by a warrior, but by a shepherd glowing with divine wisdom? That is the vision Ethiopia never let go of. In the West, Christianity's imagination of the end became a theater of fire, eternal hell, merciless wrath, and cosmic war. It gave us rapture charts, like those popularized by John Nelson Darby in the 19th century, influencing dispensationalism and books like Left Behind. It gave us medieval doomsday cults, such as the Flagellants during the Black Death in 1348, whipping themselves in apocalyptic frenzy. It gave us modern apocalyptic thrillers, from The Omen to climate doomsayers invoking Revelation's plagues. It gave us fear. It gave us finality. But Ethiopia's apocalypse offered something else, something gentler, something ancient. It offered a return. In Ethiopian art, seen in illuminated manuscripts like the Garima Gospels, possibly the oldest illustrated Christian text dating to the 6th century, the Last Judgment isn't filled with monsters. It's a symphony of justice and mercy. You see the righteous crossing luminous bridges over flames. You see archangels holding scales, not weapons. And you see souls being comforted, not condemned. The fire is still there, but it glows with meaning, not malice. And at the center of it all is a God who doesn't abandon creation in judgment, but embraces it. This vision was never about escaping a burning world. It was about healing it, about restoring the broken harmony between heaven and earth. For centuries, these Ethiopian texts, preserved in ge'ez, sung in stone churches, guarded by monks in the highlands, were ignored, dismissed as oddities or heresy. European colonizers in the scramble for Africa viewed them through an Orientalist lens as primitive relics. But today, Western scholars are beginning to listen again, to look beyond the imperial canon, to consider that what Ethiopia kept may be closer to what early Christians actually believed before Rome turned theology into politics. Figures like Elaine Pagels in her book Revelations explore alternative apocalypses, while Ethiopian studies programs at universities like Hamburg and Toronto analyze ge'ez manuscripts. Archaeological digs at Axum reveal obelisks blending Christian and pre-Christian symbols, showing a seamless evolution, and that raises a question the West can no longer avoid. What if this was Christianity's original path? Not domination, but devotion. Not fear of hell, but longing for light. Not separation, but return. In the words of one Ethiopian priest interviewed in a 2015 documentary, the end is not the closing of the book. It is the turning of the page back to the beginning, where we walked with God. This is Ethiopia's final gift, a memory of faith unbroken by empire, a vision of judgment soaked not in vengeance but in tears and light. A reminder that the story of Christianity was never meant to be written in blood and war, but in mercy, mystery, and hope. So the question now isn't what Ethiopia preserved. The question is, what are we ready to remember? As we face our own modern apocalypses, climate crises evoking Revelation's scorched earth, pandemics like plagues, wars mirroring Armageddon, perhaps Ethiopia's voice offers a path forward. Not through fear, but through compassion, not division, but healing. In rediscovering this lost apocalypse, we might just find the mercy our world so desperately needs.